Good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining this ParDreamin session. Um, as always, we have some housekeeping items to remind you of. Um, yes, we're recording, and we're going to add if you want to ask any questions, please add them into the chat, and we'll address them in Q&A as if time allows at the end. Good morning, everybody, and thank you. I'd like to welcome Bill Fetter, the founder of Unfettered Marketing, and Paul Hancock, marketing freelancer. They're going to dive into the 4 standard campaign influence models, auto association settings, and what we need to watch out for along the way. So take it away, Bill.
Thanks very much. As I mentioned, Paul Hancock is with me this morning, aka Pardot Paul. He's going to be color commentary on this morning's presentation. But first, Pam, would you launch the poll, please? So the poll is just asking if you have enabled campaign influence, customized campaign influence or not. And we really don't know how that poll yet. So go ahead and answer that question if you've enabled customized campaign influence or not. All right. As soon as you've gotten some responses, Pam, you can close that out because I can't see the poll results on the screen.
I can see a little bit for you, Bill. It's about split. We got about a 55 to 44 split of yes to no. So it's about equal.
Great. All right, fantastic. So this should be really valuable information for those who haven't looked at this yet, and we'll dive into how you get this going in the right way. All right, let's close that poll, and let's get started. So the question is, when should we adopt customized campaign influence? And I think the impetus for this whole presentation is Paul and I are in a Slack channel for Pardot users, and I brought up a question one day, which it turned out to be a red herring, really, and it was how campaign influence gets split if you have different record types for campaigns. But it launched this enormously long thread with multiple people on it discussing customizable campaign influence and how it actually works. And we discovered, frankly, right, Paul, that there's really not much documentation on how this thing actually works.
Yeah, it was kind of like we all knew little bits and pieces, but there wasn't a lot there telling us here's how it works and here's how you can adopt it in a best practice. We were like, great, it tells us, but how do we really do this?
Right. What does it actually do? How does it work? So this presentation is an attempt to demystify this and give you all the things that you're supposed to think about when you're looking at using customizable campaign influence. So the first thing I want to mention, and this is super important, is that if you have Growth Edition, this presentation is not for you. I'm sorry. But it's not available if you have Growth Edition or any prior edition of Pardot that is equivalent to Growth. So you must have the current Plus edition or better. And this is another point, that if you have old versions of Pardot, it's not an automatic upgrade when they release a new naming convention and a new package for Pardot. So you could have something in the legacy camp called Standard. You might have Pro. You might have Enterprise. The point is that make sure that you can even do this before you go to all the effort to figure this out. And if you want to bring your license of Pardot up to the current standard, that's something that Pardot and your sales rep has to do for you. So again, if you have Growth, this presentation is not going to work for you because you don't have these settings available to you. All right, so what do you do? How are we going to set this up? So if you're going to turn things on, and if you haven't already, this is the best concept of a roadmap for what sequence you want to do things in if you were setting this up from scratch. So really, you want to start with planning what you're going to do. Don't turn on anything. Don't turn on any settings. Don't do anything without thinking through from end to end what exactly you are going to do with this thing, because there are consequences to your decisions, and you want to make sure that you've thought the whole thing through before before you get started. So the first thing is to plan it out. The second thing is to turn on connected campaigns. That's in Pardot. The third thing is to set up B2B marketing analytics, aka Tableau CRM. The fourth thing is to turn on the auto association settings in Salesforce, and then turn on the campaign influence tick box in those auto association settings. So those are the individual settings. Now the question is, what do you need when you're setting this thing up? And there's actually a tremendous number of contributing elements to this. And a lot of them aren't actually in Pardot at all. There's really only a couple of things in Pardot. You need the connected campaigns, like I mentioned, and you need some add to CRM campaign actions to be able to do this. But really everything else is Salesforce campaigns, the influence settings, things on the opportunities. You need to set up the related list so you can see what's going on. It's reporting. So a tremendous amount of this stuff in terms of setting it up and using it is actually in Salesforce. So if you're not a Salesforce admin, make real nice with your Salesforce admin, because you're going to need them to be able to do all this for you. Or get to the point where your admin trusts you enough that you can work with these things yourself and be able to create what you need in terms of your campaigns and your influence settings. All right, looks like we've lost Paul in the ether somewhere, so hopefully he's able to get back on again. So Salesforce campaigns. So I've always said that Pardot was what made Salesforce campaigns truly useful. Back before you could do anything with them in an automated fashion, they really didn't do much for you. But activating connected campaigns really does force you to use Salesforce campaigns, because then you can't create a campaign in Pardot anymore without having it created in Salesforce first. The other thing that is so important when you're using Salesforce campaigns is create custom member statuses for your campaigns. And I recommend working with your team to build a library of the standard statuses that everyone can agree on, so that for trade shows, we're going to use this set of statuses. For white papers, we're going to use that set of statuses. And for forms, we're going to use this set of statuses, and so on. Because they're not drop downs, they're just free text. So if everybody can do anything they want and you don't have a set of standards, or you don't have a set of guidelines to go from, you can't make sure that the thing is standardized and that you're looking at the same thing each time. So have a set of standards that you're working from. And the other thing that I want to mention is on that campaign member status is that responded checkbox. And I know there's the responded status and there's the responded checkbox. The responded checkbox is really useful because you can use it to indicate, is this status one that somebody did something we wanted them to do? So a lot of times I see people using this and they're not really using that responded checkbox in a meaningful way. The purpose of the responded checkbox is purpose of the responded checkbox is to indicate to you and in your reporting, and you can even use it as a filtering criteria when you set up customized campaigns, for you to be able to indicate, is this action something I wanted somebody to do? Is that it, versus just simply, I invited them to something, that's not responded, but they've responded to the invitation, that's a responded status. So I don't like how the standard set of defaults, one of them is called responded. That I think just confuses the issue. The responded status is, did you do something I wanted you to do? Also on campaigns, make sure you customize those campaign layouts. There are 17 related lists now when you're connected to Pardot. 17 related lists on campaigns. Most people don't have most of them turned on. So go ahead and look and see what those are, what those available ones are, and there's probably quite a lot of them that aren't even enabled that would be useful to you. All kinds of things like which emails were sent, landing pages, and there's several for campaign influence that you've got available to you. All right, next one is campaign filtering. So the key with doing all of this is filtering which campaigns you want to count as influential. So you can create custom fields on campaigns. Most people don't, but you absolutely can. It's just like any other Salesforce object. It's not really useful in Pardot today because Pardot doesn't read any of those custom fields. So really the value in it is downstream when you're talking about campaign influence and reporting in Salesforce. So you can even create record types for campaigns if you want to. And this is where this whole thing started. We were talking about whether record types had any impact on this at all. And the answer is it can be useful, but it doesn't have any impact on campaign influence on its own. So what do you want? What kind of custom fields might you want to create on Salesforce campaigns? Well, first of all, I recommend you make them be explicit choices. So a drop down instead of fill in the blank, because then filtering is terrible, because if it's fill in the blank, then it's whatever anybody put in there. So use explicit choices. You can do fields that are ways of categorizing things that are outside of the type fields. So you might want to categorize campaigns according to a hierarchy that you're defining hierarchical statuses. You might want to use fields that define whether or not these people are customers or prospects. You might want to use fields that define other attributes of campaigns like geography, or whether it's an offline activity or an online activity. So all of these ways are ways that you can look at, how do I want to filter my campaigns in reporting later. So we'll get to how that's useful in a moment. So the next thing is setting up B2B marketing analytics. This is the Tableau CRM portion. I'm not going to go into this as to how it's done. The documentation is very good, but it's the next step. Make sure you set this up so that it's tracking everything in the background. This will give you the multi-touch attribution dashboard in the Tableau dashboards. So that will give you another form of reporting that's available to you when this thing is enabled. All right, next thing is the auto association settings. Okay, so this is finally where you're getting into looking at how do I turn this thing on. So you can't set this up unless you're a Salesforce admin, but these are the rules on what you're going to consider as influential. So setting this thing up in advance and turning on the feature lets you figure out what you're going to do beforehand, and then it's going to go through and it's going to calculate your entire database based on the rules you've set. So here's the trick. Once you set this up, it goes through and calculates the whole database. If you say, whoops, I made a mistake, it's going to go through and recalculate everything when you change it. You can only have one set of settings in place, period. So don't change the model once you've set it up. I mean, you can, but everything's going to recalculate from the beginning of time onwards. So don't do it frivolously. You want to basically set up this model and have it be your model. Doesn't mean you can't tweak it, but the point being that it's got to be the one that you use, because it affects the way everything's calculated. So again, careful planning is required. All right, auto association. So here's the first element of this, and it's the time. It's the time of the association. So here's the critical bits. The time of the first association with the campaign. Okay, the first association with the campaign and the opportunity creation date. That's the time bracket. And we'll talk about what that means a little bit down the road. But again, remember that it's the time of the first association with the campaign, not the time that the filtered activity took place, but the first association with the campaign and then the opportunity creation date. That's the time window we're talking about. We'll get to that in a little bit. Then there's your rules. So again, this is huge. Make a plan. Make a plan for how you're going to deal with this. This set of rules follows the same setup as any other set of Salesforce rules that you set up. It's got the filter logic available to you. It's pulling any field that's available on campaign. So you can use any custom fields you created. You can use a record type if you have record types. You can use naming convention if you want to. You can use any field that's in the campaign to set up what you want to filter as being influential or not. Now, the very simplest thing you could do is just simply say, all of my campaigns are influential, and I just want to use it's a responded status or not. Responded checkbox is true. That's the simplest thing you can do. And basically say, remember when I said before, responded checkbox means did they do what I wanted them to do? So then it could be, okay, any campaign where somebody did what I wanted them to do, considered influential. The auto check, the response checkbox is ticked. So that's a very simple way you can do it, but you can get as elaborate as you want to. You can go to geography, you can do record types, you can do currency. You can use a custom field to define a hierarchy if you want to, and you can use that to filter out what you want to count in or out of this model. So you have lots of choices, and there's not any one way to do it, but what it does is it gives you the flexibility to work this into the context of your organization and how you want to work with campaigns. Again, campaign planning, super, super important. Make sure you understand how you're structuring your campaigns. All right, so once you figured all of this out, the basic setting is it's enabled, and you enable the model, and then it goes through and does the calculation of all of your campaign influence. The calculation takes a little while, not days, but it takes an hour or more. So don't decide you're going to turn this on because you're in a hurry and you've got to see campaign influence. It's not going to happen immediately, but once that's turned on, it's turned on. Now you can also turn it off, change your settings, turn it back on again, and it'll recalculate. All right, so what are the model settings? So if you change the model, it'll recalculate everything. Okay, so here are the 4 standard model settings. So there's the primary, which is the old one, the original one we had with Salesforce, which is basically primary campaign influence field on an opportunity was filled in. We have a first touch model. These are the ones enabled by Pardot: the first touch, the last touch, and the even distribution. So those are the ones that Pardot enables. And here's the key thing. Only one can be default, obviously. And default means that's the one you see when you're looking on a record. So if you're looking at campaign influence on a record, on an opportunity, on an account, on a contact, that's the one you see on the front end. However, you can have all 4 of them active at the same time if you want to. And what that does is it makes all of them available in reporting if you want to look at, well, if we were, if this was first touch, what was the first touch? If this was last touch, what was the last touch? So you can have all of the models active at the same time, even though only one can be the default model. So there's also another one. If you have Einstein and you turn that on, you're going to get another model called the data-driven model, and that is whatever Einstein wants it to be, right? Einstein's a black box, so Einstein's going to do as Einstein does, and you're going to get that other model available in there to you as well. But you have to have a lot of data for that even to work properly, so be warned. So let's talk about now what influence is. So what are the components of getting influence on your individual records? So the first thing is that you have to have an opportunity contact role. So that's presence. That's presence of a contact on an opportunity. The second thing is that you have to have an opportunity that defines the time frame. Remember, the opportunity created date is one of the primary dates that we're talking about. And then you have a campaign member. So that's the time of the first association plus your filtering criteria. So all 3 of these things have to be present for you to get any attribution on an opportunity at all. All 3 you must have. So let's talk for a moment about contact roles. So if you don't have a contact role on your opportunity, and I see this a lot, contact roles, no, 0. If you have no role, you will not get any influence. Full stop. No exceptions. This is very common, unfortunately. I see a lot of orgs where there is no contact role on lots of the opportunities. Now, why do you have contact roles on opportunities? Well, From a sales perspective, you have them on there because that's who you're talking to, right? If you're doing sales reviews with your reps, the sales manager would want to see, okay, on this opportunity, who are you talking to? How are they involved? That's the sales reason to have them there. The marketing reason is you need it for influence. So let's look at how do you get a contact role automatically on an opportunity. So there are a few ways to get it automatically, but there are a few ways where it doesn't happen. So the easiest way is if you're converting from a lead and creating an opportunity at the same time, that person carries over onto the opportunity and gets associated as a contact role. Boom, you're done. If you convert from a lead but create the opportunity later, well, it depends on how you create that opportunity as to whether or not you get a contact role automatically. So if you create the opportunity directly from the contact, yes, you get that opportunity contact role, whether or not it was a converted lead. If you create it from the contact, you get that person on there as an opportunity role automatically. If you create an opportunity from the account, you do not, because it doesn't know who to put on the opportunity as the contact role. If you create it from an opportunity list view, you do not get it. And if you clone an opportunity with or without contact roles, you do not get contact roles either. So there's more ways to not get it than to get it, unfortunately. Now, there are some ways that you can solve this problem automatically. Jen Kazin is doing a session tomorrow at 10:50 a.m. called Why Contact Roles Are Mission Critical and How to Effectively Add Them. I recommend that session because this is so important. If you want to use customizable campaign influence, you have to have contact roles. No two ways about it. So either your salespeople get good at this or you find ways around your salespeople. All right. So next point. Influence starts in Pardot. Influence starts in Pardot. Adding someone to a CRM campaign as a completion action does not automatically sync somebody to Salesforce. That's another common misconception that I see is people thinking that, well, I added them to the CRM campaign. How come they're not in Salesforce? Because putting someone in Salesforce is a separate action that you have to do as a completion action or an automation rule or something else. So simply adding someone to a CRM campaign does not put them in Salesforce. However, it's going to remember that happened, and it will put them in that campaign eventually when they do get synced to Salesforce. So that's key, and we'll talk about where that can trip you up later. The other thing about adding to CRM campaign, again, just a little thing is if you want to change what their status in, it's the same action, add to CRM campaign, and then use the different status. So even though they're already in the campaign, add to CRM campaign, and then change the status if you want to change somebody's status from, let's say I was invited and now they've responded. So that same action applies whether you're adding them as brand new or whether you're changing their status. So the question you have to ask yourself is, a lot of people will look at their campaigns and they'll say, well, how come the number of people in my campaign doesn't match the number of people that this action took place in Pardot? And the answer is, well, are all those people that are in Pardot that took this action, are they all in Salesforce yet? And typically the answer is, oh, well, not everybody, because they don't have a high enough score or whatever. So you can't put them in a Salesforce campaign until they're actually in Salesforce. I mean, you can put them in, you can make this action, but they're not going to go into the campaign until they're actually in Salesforce. So that gets us to this little trick, which is that the first associated date is the same as the campaign member created date. Okay, so the first associated date, and that is the date that campaign influence is looking for, the first associated date. So that's the same as the campaign member created date. So we have to think about, when did the person get put in the campaign to begin with, and whether or not that presence in that campaign means that they're available to be influenced. So, for example, if they were put in the campaign because they're invited, but then they didn't they didn't respond until 4 days later. Well, actually, the date that's appropriate, that influence is going to look at here, is the date they were invited, not the day they responded. So that, again, gets into this little funkiness on timing windows that we're going to look at in a moment. All right, so when we look at time calculation, so this is another one where you're going to have to talk to your sales team. I know, but you have to talk to your sales team. So because we want to think about, well, what is our sales cycle look like, or what does our qualification cycle look like? Because that time calculation is a little funky. If you put the window at 30 days, it really means 30 days prior to the creation of the opportunity. And that's really all it means. It will also associate people after you've created the opportunity with that same campaign. But the time frame doesn't actually really matter once the opportunity create date takes place, because you get a negative number from that calculation. So the middle column is showing the same 30-day time frame, and the difference between something that occurred before the opportunity was created and something that occurred after the opportunity was created. So you'll see that the calculation actually shows minus 41 days in the second column. Well, minus 41 is less than 30. So you're going to get campaign influence on something that happens after that action takes place. So this can even cause trouble potentially if you have super long sales cycles, because look at the third column. That's a 30-day window too. But again, because something can occur after the opportunity was created, and I could have something that happens 2 weeks before a 6-month sales cycle closes, and that's at a minus 194 days, it's still considered influential. Now, the thinking obviously there is, well, if something has happened while people are in a sales cycle, it must be influential in some way. So that's, I guess, the thinking behind how it works. But just be aware that if you do things like you park opportunities out in the future for some reason, like they're put out there because they're for a renewal or something like that, think about the influence on your timing for influence, because if it happens, if that campaign time calculation takes place, it's gonna be impacted by the opportunity created date, not the close date, the created date, and then also when the opportunity member status was first associated. So there's lots of things to think about here, and this is another good plug for, once you put this in place, audit what it's doing and see what behavior it's exhibiting. All right, now the member creation sequence. So here's a little bit of funkiness that can happen if you have in Pardot a situation where you don't have an automatic sync of all of your Pardot people with your Salesforce records. So if you have a scenario where you've designed your system such that they don't, until they're good enough, they don't go into Salesforce, but you're still adding them to campaigns. So here's an example where if the conversion event, let's say it was a download, occurs on the 1st of October, and the add to CRM campaign status is also part of that, and they're synced to Salesforce, that causes the member create campaign member creation date. All of these things line up then. They were created in Salesforce the same day that they did the event, and they were synced to Salesforce, and they were added to the campaign. So those are all on 10/1. So then if they come back and do something later on 10/5, then you have another activity which is going to be added to their campaign history. So they're added to a secondary campaign there. So that date is 10/5. Okay, so if you're tracking, we have now 2 different member statuses, one from 10/1 and one from 10/5 on 2 different campaigns. So now what happens is, what if that first event didn't push them into Salesforce? So remember, I said that the action of putting them in that campaign is going to hang around in the background until they're pushed into Salesforce. So what happens is if the second event pushes them into Salesforce, that memory of, oh, I need to add this to the campaign happens as well. So all of those campaign member status initial first associated dates, it's the same. It's 10/5. It's not when it actually happened in Pardot. It's when it was associated in Salesforce. So you get that 10/1, action appearing as if it happened on 10/5 because that's the day they were created in Salesforce. You can't put somebody in you can't put somebody in a campaign who's not in Salesforce. You can't have a campaign member that's earlier than their Salesforce created date. So what that does in practice is this. It creates a tie between those two events as far as the influence is concerned. And what it results in is if you're using the first or last touch model, it still splits the influence because it doesn't know which one was first. So you can get the first touch and the last touch. You can have the first touch and the last touch model, but if you've got ties of when things were first associated to campaigns, you end up with, in effect, even distribution. And it appears even if you've got the first touch model turned on or the last touch model turned on, it'll appear as if it was even distribution because those events are tied. So that is another sort of quirk with the way that this thing works, is if you're not creating people in Salesforce at the same time you're associating them with campaigns. All right. So now you have to ask yourselves, which campaign members and which actions do we want to count towards opportunity influence? All right. So we have to think about where do we want people in the campaigns and what actions do we want to take. So here's some other examples for you. All right. So we can think about campaign hierarchy. So you can use this, but you need to be careful with how you use it. Best practices, don't do more than 2 or 3 levels in the campaign hierarchy maximum. It's just too hard to keep track of it if you try to do more than that. However, hierarchy itself isn't really an easily filtered attribute back in your rules. Oh, there's Paul. Paul's finally rejoined.
Hey guys, sorry about that.
Yeah, wow. Well, we're just talking about campaign hierarchy here and how to put people into the campaign hierarchy. And what I was just saying is that hierarchy itself isn't an attribute you can easily filter on. So it's another example of what you can use with campaigns. What you can use with campaign custom status is you can actually define your hierarchy as a custom field, parent, child, grandchild, whatever, and use that as a filtering criteria for where you want to be able to count people as influential. So what we're going to talk about right now is the gotchas with campaign influence and hierarchies. And again, this kind of goes back to where we originally started. So if you have a 3-level hierarchy like this, and let's say you want to look at all your webinars at the top level, and then you want to look at specific webinars at the middle level, and then specific actions that got people to sign up for the webinar in the middle level. So you have to ask yourself, what do you have to ask yourself in this situation, Paul?
Well, again, it's kind of like where you're going to populate people in, and then how you're going to report on those. What level are you going to report on? And exactly. Typically that's tough because usually sometimes put in both or none, or it gets confusing.
Right, exactly. So this is where you might want to look at, okay, I'm going to put people, I might want to put people in multiple levels of the hierarchy because I want to know who went through the landing page and I want to know who responded to the list email. But really all I'm interested in is, did we get people to attend the webinar, kind of the middle section? Like, okay, fine, people signed up, but did they attend the webinar? So that's what I actually want to measure here and why I want to consider influential. I don't care if people signed up. I want to know if they were there. So maybe the way that you want to filter this is you want to say, I want to filter this by the middle level of the hierarchy, even though, and here's the tricky bit, I could have people at both levels. But if I don't filter out at a level, then I'm going to end up with this split, right? I'm going to end up splitting the influence between the middle level and the bottom level of the hierarchy. Right, Paul?
Yeah, and it kind of makes it look so you're kind of double dipping in a way, and you're
Mhm.
splitting out. So you're saying, well, if I look at webinar, well, the child's still listed in there as well. So if you had, say, 3 campaigns in your influence, you say, well, 2 out of the 3 are going to be now tied to same one event, even though they are split between 2 campaigns. But then the question you start when you look at reporting is, you're great. I want to know who was involved at that lower level. I want to know how my landing page performs. I want to know how my email performs. But if I do so, then now I have a hard time trying to measure the webinar.
Right. So that's where you want to think about, okay, from my model perspective, because you can put people anywhere you want. From my model perspective, do I want to only consider as influential people who are placed at that middle level, or do I want to look at people who are placed at the lower level? I mean, you're going to have more likely, in a lot of situations, you'll have more likelihood of double dipping at the bottom level, where people are, in the same things in the same tree. Basically, they could have gone through the landing page and they could have gotten the email, for example, the invitation email. So that's where you have to be careful and say, maybe we want to say, I'm only going to filter out influential activities at that middle level. And I'm still going to put people at the lower level, but I'm not going to consider anything down there as influential. I only care about, did they attend the event that we took all the time this time to put on. So that the effect of that is, if you don't filter it in this way, then you're going to end up splitting it between the 2 levels. And this is where this whole thing really started, was how does this work? So here's where that meets the road. And it's what do these numbers mean when you're looking at the campaign, right? The opportunities in the campaign versus the ones versus the value of 1. So this doesn't mean what you think it means, right? It can be very easily misunderstood. So yes, you could definitely have 3 opportunities, but that value is not the sum of those 3 opportunities, right?
Yeah, this is where you get that splitting, or again, you get parses out. It can make things really difficult, and that number can change over
Right.
time. You could look at it today, and if somebody adds another campaign in, that number can go down. Or, if campaigns, like you said, we're looking at those dates. If the dates change and stuff, and you're saying, wait a minute, we changed the criteria on our influence model.
Right.
Now those
Yep.
things, some things will just disappear. So if you recalculate it, it will recalculate these numbers.
Exactly. So it will everything.
I just want
Go
to step
ahead.
in and say we've got 2 minutes left.
Got it. Okay. Well, we're almost done. So yeah, this will recalculate based on what that does, and that value is the value of the influence. It's not the value of the opportunities. It's the value of the amount of influence assigned to that campaign. So the total number of opportunities can be the same, but the value may move all over the place. All right. So where to find it? This again, make nice with your admins. There's all kinds of related lists that you can put on leads and contacts and accounts and opportunities. And as I mentioned, there's 17 you can put on campaigns. So make sure that you've got those related lists on here so people can see this stuff. But remember, the model that's active is the model you see. All right, reporting. There is a standard report for campaign influence when you turn this on. It's available, and you can use all those predefined filters for your campaigns. So you can use the filters in the influence reporting to look at the other models. So first of all, if you're using Tableau and you want to use the pre-built CRM multi-touch, you can switch between the models easily here. It's just a selection. And then you can filter down within the dashboard. Now, this is the sort of the top level, easy to use view, very nice visualizations and so forth. But if you want to dig in, if you're a Salesforce reporting junkie like I am, you get campaigns with influenced opportunities. You can report on all the models, and you've got to filter. You've got to filter by which model you want to report on, or it's going to show you all of them at the same time. So this is another one. If you turn them all on, you've got to use this report. You've got to filter out which model. That's why it's important to see that model name in your columns. so that you can say, well, I want to see what this looked like, or how many of these, what did this look like with first touch versus last touch versus even distribution. So again, I'm a junkie for reporting, Paul. I know you are too. This is where you really can dig deep and see what's going on. Right?
And this is where you can spot different things with the different models. You can see how the first touch is performing, and it might spot things. And again, last touch is also one in there that most people haven't really considered, but it can actually give some results as well. And again, having multiple models is much easier than trying to run on one and making assumptions about everything else.
All right. I think so. We've covered a lot of stuff, and thank you, Paul. I'm sorry about your technical glitch. We managed. There's a lot of questions, and I think we're out of time. However, we will make sure that the questions get answered, and we will post those for you. We also, in the slide deck, which you'll have available to you, we have a bunch of resources for you for the setup of these systems, and some things from the help articles. And of course, we also want to thank our sponsors for this event, which are listed on this screen. So thank you all for attending. Pam, do you have anything else to wrap us up?
No, you thanked our sponsors, and just a note to everybody to remember to go visit them at their booths. And thank you to both of you, Paul and Bill, for this great session. And I did collect all of the questions that were posted, so I can ship them off to you. But thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everybody.
Okay, great. Thank you. Bye.